Before we get started, you should have the following things: an equation solving checkup worksheet, and most importantly, a pencil. What you will be doing throughout this video is working along with me to answer the following questions 1 through 4 on your equation solving checkup worksheet. Reminder, you will be writing this down. Let's go over number 1. Number 1 is a two-step equation. Once again, our goal here, or solving two-step equations, is to get the variable x by itself. Now remember, we have 2 steps to our two-step equation, and our first step is always to add or subtract by the lone number, and finally our second step is to divide by the coefficient. So if you work with me for number 1, we can answer this together. 2x plus 8 equals 20. Our first step, once again, is to divide the equation into 2 parts. And we know whatever we do to one side, we have to do to the other. I can see here that we are adding 8. And if I want to get that out of there so I can have 2x by itself, I know I have to do its opposite, which is subtract 8. And I need to do that to both sides. Once again, plus 8 and negative 8 cancel each other out, and I'm simply left with 2x equals 12. Now what I want to do here is the second part of my two-step equation, which is once again divide by the coefficient. I want to divide by 2 to both sides so that I can get x by itself, and x is going to equal 6. I circle my answer to show that I am done, and once again, I've now solved number 1, saying that x equals 6. As we go over number 2, we can see that this is pretty much the same thing as number 1. The only difference here is that we are now subtracting in this equation compared to adding like we were in number 1. Everything that we do here is the same. Both steps, number 1, which is adding or subtracting by the lone number, and the second step, which is dividing once again by the coefficient. To start this equation, I draw my line down the middle, showing that both parts are separate, or the equal sign is separate on both sides. Once again, I know that whatever I do to one side, I must do to the other. Once again, we are subtracting 4, which means that now I have to do its opposite, which is add 4 to both sides. Since I do this, I know that minus 4 and plus 4 cancel out, and I'm left with 11x on this side. It's important to note that you must bring down that 11x because x is not by itself at this point. There's 11 in front of x, meaning that x is being multiplied by 11. So once again, I have 11x on this side, and 40 plus 4 equals 44. Finally, step 2 is to once again divide, and I know that since this means multiplication, I must divide by 11 to get x by itself. And here I can see that 44 divided by 11 is 4. So my answer is x equals 4. As we move towards number 3, many of you are looking at this problem and thinking, what the heck do I do? Simply, the first thing that we need to do is just identify what problem this is, or what type of equation this is. We know that just by looking at this, there are 2 variables on each side, and there are 2 regular numbers on each side. With this being said, we know that this is a multi-step equation. And once again, our goal is to get all the variables on one side of the equation sign, or the equal sign, and all the regular numbers on the other side. We set up our problem the exact same. I know that I draw a line down the middle, separating both sides of the equation. I need to think to myself at this point, I want to move the variables first, but which one should I move? I'm going to highlight this negative 2x first. I don't like negative numbers, and I want to get rid of that negative number as fast as possible. So how do I do that? Well, moving a number with a variable is just like moving any other number we always do. It's opposite. And if I want to get rid of that negative 2, I know that the opposite of negative is a positive, so I add 2x to both sides. With that being said, a negative 2x and a positive 2x cancel out each other. I'm left with just 12 equals 5x plus 2. Now once again, I want to remind you that a 3x plus 2x equals 5x. And I'm left with a two-step equation here. After doing the last two problems, we should be really good at answering two-step equations. First part, adding or subtracting the lone number. Second part, dividing by the coefficient. So once again, now I have 12 equals 5x plus 2. And the first thing I want to do is do the opposite of that lone number. Plus 2 and negative 2 cancel out each other, and I'm simply left with 5x equals 10. The second part of my equation is to divide by the coefficient, which here is 5, and I get x by itself, which equals 2. As we move on to number 4 is the hardest question on this paper. And many of you are struggling with the idea of the distributive property. If you remember what you learned last year, we know that we simply just take that 4 and multiply it by everything inside the parentheses. Once again, if we look at our goal, it is to multiply the number outside of the parentheses to both of the numbers inside the parentheses. And if I draw my arrows here, I know that I'm going to multiply 4 by x and 4 by 2. And those are the first two steps to solving this equation. I can act like there's a 1 in front of that x. And to solve this, I know that I multiply now 4 times 1. And that gets me 4. And I can't forget my variable, which is x. I keep my addition sign. And now I multiply 4 times 2, which is 8. And I can say here now that 4x plus 8 equals 40. Once again, we now notice that this is a simple two-step equation, and we can solve for x like we've done now for every question on this paper. Once again, I have a plus 8. And I want to get rid of that number. So what do I have to do? Well, if I have a plus 8, I have to subtract 8 to both sides. A plus 8 and a minus 8 cancel each other out, and I'm left with 4x equals 32. Once again, I divide by my coefficient, which is 4x, and I know that that is multiplication. And in order to get rid of multiplication, I have to divide. 32 divided by 4, x equals 8.